In a second-hand set of dimensions, on an astral plane that was never meant to fly, through wavering star mists, see the Grey Satuin. Drifting onwards through space, atop the shell of the world's turtle, are 4 giant elephants, upon whose broad shoulders rests the Discworld. Welcome to Dining Table Discworld. We're reading through the Discworld novels and discussing them at our dining table. Be aware there will be spoilers for the current book and others in the series.
Hello, welcome to Dining Table Discworld. I'm Dave.
I'm Kathy.
Today we're talking about the 13th book in the Discworld series, which is Small Gods, published in 1992. Do we have a synopsis?
Yes. Brother is a novice in the citadel of Omnia, a fervently monotheistic and patriarchal desert nation. He alone hears the voice of the god Om coming from an ill-tempered tortoise, and then life gets complicated. Vorbis, the terrifyingly ambitious head of the Inquisition, realises he can use Brother's perfect memory to further his plans for holy war. Brother is torn between the rigid expectations of the Church and the heretics who refute the dogma of heliocentrism and whisper to each other that the turtle moves. On a diplomatic trip to neighbouring Thebe, Brother encounters polytheism, philosophy, and a huge library. After diplomacy descends into war, Brother must trek through the desert, defying his god's orders to prioritise self-preservation. Back in Omnia, Brother is helped with his moral quandary by a sweeper. Meanwhile, the rebels take a stand against orthodoxy, and God as a tortoise desperately labours to be reunited with his sole believer.
Excellent.
Just a quick content note. We mention torture because the book mentions torture. There's no specific details in the episode, just reference to burning and mention of crucifixion. The book itself doesn't have much detail either, but it is in there.
What are your first thoughts?
So, Small Gods is one of the ones that I only read once as a teenager and didn't remember much about. Just sort of odd bits. It is one I've also heard a lot of people talk about and praise very highly and say how important it is to them, so I was interested in coming back to it. And yeah, I liked it. I thought it was very compelling. There's a lot of stuff in there that I understand more about now, partly because of stuff I've studied and stuff I'm interested in, and partly just, I guess, living. And yeah, I did like it, apart from one thing that I'm going to mention when we get into it a bit more. I can see why it's so foundational to a lot of people. It's not had that effect on me, but I think when I first read it, I probably wasn't in a place for that. And now, I guess a lot of my own ideas are already, in place. Yeah. How about you?
I think this is one I've read a couple of times and have never gone back to, and I think that, it's an okay book. I wouldn't say I dislike it, but I think throughout, because I don't know enough about Greek philosophers or philosophy or things like that, I felt that I was always missing the jokes. Some of them I got, but through a lot of it, it's like things would happen. It's like, I'm sure this is supposed to be funny, but I'm just missing it. I don't know. It just fell a bit flat for me.
I mean, it's not just, there's some philosophy in there, which is not my favourite part of.
Yeah, I think it's in general, I just.
But there's also stuff about early Christianity and things.
Again,
as well.
it just felt me, and it's just a little disappointing because it has the first bits about history monks, which I love, and I can certainly see the sort of moral and ethical stuff could definitely be very formative, and perhaps it did form some of my early belief, but obviously not well enough that I went, yes, I can point to that book. Yeah, but perhaps again we're old enough that I think a lot of our thoughts on things possibly marry up somewhat to what the book is saying anyway.
When it comes to personal religion, I've gone through a bit of a journey between the ages of about 10 to mid-20s.
Yeah.
I say journey, it sounds quite grand. Just my opinions changing over time from how I was raised. Well, I think we've both got a mother who's Christian and a father who's atheist.
Yes.
And the general thought is that you kind of pick up the religion of your parents. And I've certainly been through both of those and ended up somewhere in a kind of like muddy agnostic sort of space myself.
Like most people in Britain, I think.
Possibly.
What was first on our list? I've completely forgotten.
It's the one kind of major objection I have.
So we're starting there.
Well, I think I said if we start with that, then it kind of is out of the way and we can get on to the meat of the book.
Go for it.
So as I've already said, I can understand how this is absolutely foundational. Some people's thinking, it's a brilliant take on organised religion. I saw something somewhere recently where somebody said it's both a deconstruction and criticism, but also defence of organised religion. And I can see all that, and it's very well done, and it's a compelling story. Quite like stuff about ancient Greece, although that's kind of more of a flavour thing, and, you know, there's stuff about early Christianity, particularly, that's in there. And that's all fine. I can see why it's very important to people. But of all the people who talked about this book with such admiration, none of them mentioned this thing I'm going to say. There are no women in this book. Like, it's not just worse than Colour of Magic, it's worse than Lord of the Rings.
Yes.
And when you're reading it initially, you're like, well, the initial setting, you know, the Citadel of Om, is very patriarchal. It's a very masculine space. But then even when they go to a Thebe, it's rather suggested that there are probably women there. But I can't remember if any of them ever speak. There's a goddess of wisdom. I don't think she says anything. She's just kind of there in a kind of like, here's a pantheon, here's polytheism.
To be fair, none of the gods other than Om really say much.
No, but they're just sort of shown.
But yes, yeah, there are absolutely no... Well,
there's no female characters.
There is one side-mentioned character, which is female, but...
I mean, I think there might be a bit when they're in the big square, which is where the general populace is.
There are some in there.
I think there's a suggestion that are women about, and it's made clear that this is not just a monastery, it's a functioning citadel. It is suggested there are a lot of people there, probably a lot of regular people that we don't really see, and I think the inference is that some are women, but none are specifically mentioned.
I think one was asleep.
Who's she? Who are you talking about here?
One of the women in the...
Well, because there are pilgrims that turn up, aren't there? So I think, again, the assumption is some of them are women, that of the various kind of trades and groups there, that, you know, there are women among them. But it's just, of characters, there's Brother's horrible, abusive grandmother who scared him so much as a child. And I think her words are quoted, but she's this kind of, like, terrifying childhood figure of the past. And then there's vague suggestions of carnality, which tend towards the feminine, sort of in a very disjointed, sort of unclear way, particularly when Brother's the viewpoint character, because again, the only female he ever seems to have encountered is apparently his grandmother and maybe some people in the village he was in before, perhaps, who knows. And if this was just, you know, generic male fantasy writer writing in the early 90s, it'd be like, oh, okay, yeah. But it's Pratchett. He's famously good at putting women in his books. We've had 3 witch books at this point. Are you waving because you found a woman speaking?
Yes!
Okay, who is it?
I've no idea. She's just stated as a young woman. The petitioners in the place of lamentation, and the Eagle lands, and an old man goes, "It's a sign," and yes, a sign. A young woman said, a young woman next to him.
Yeah, so there's like a lady in the crowd. When they go to a Thebe, I think maybe there'll be a bit more.
I think that there's a couple more. Sorry, I feel I've succeeded in it doesn't negate the point at all. It was perhaps
there's no characters.
I think it reinforces the point that
While I've been talking, you spent a few minutes trying to find any speech marks that were attributed to a woman, and you found one, and it was somebody unnamed. And I wonder if this is one of the reasons, not like consciously realised, it didn't gel with me as a child or as a teenager, because it's like, I'm not there. People like me aren't really in this.
No.
Yeah, because when they went to... I noticed it at first. I thought, oh, this is what this place is like. And they go to a Thebe, which is supposed to be different. But again, I think there's a suggestion there are like servants or slaves or people in the palace or in the streets that are women. But he just walks past
they're non-gendered. It's kind of like there are people in the crowd scenes, people in the... It's not... You presume that they would be mixed gender, but there's not it's not specified.
No. And you could say, oh, well, Pratchett's, taking apart religion, and that's kind of very patriarchal here in the West, and okay, that's fine, but I feel a bit like a lot of this is based on early Christianity, and one of the reasons that we aren't celebrating Mithras now, who has the same birthday as Jesus, both 25th of December, is that the cult of Mithras was very popular in the Roman army, but was male only, whereas early Christianity, probably took hold and became so successful because it was for the whole community, and there's a lot of stuff about early women, and there's a lot of women in the Bible, and I don't know, I do trust Pratchett with a lot of stuff around gender. This almost feels like a bit of a kind of backward step, and also that someone's setting out their grand vision of how to be, which we'll get to, and there's just no one like me, is there?
I'd like to think it's not a conscious decision.
No, but it's quite a big omission.
Yes, I think there is you could certainly have fitted some women characters into it all. How significant they would have been, given the story, the philosophers are all men,
I mean, you think about, other stuff he's done, again, the milieus that are very masculine, and they're still women in there, and strong women, and women with names and agency and things to do, rather than just this absolute absence. And it just also got me thinking, because if you look at another fantasy writer who was using fantasy to criticise organised religion it's a bit later, that wasn't it?
It was late.
Yeah.
It was later.
But, Philip Pullman, that whole story is mostly about a girl, and there's tons of women in that. So, yeah, I felt like I had to get that out before we got on to the rest of it. Moving on to Pratchett's sort of take on organised religion, although, again, kind of referring to Pullman, because there was that thing, wasn't there, where I think, was it the Catholic Church? Certain parts of the Catholic Church banned his Dark Materials books,
I'm
or they
sure
were angry because it was...
The church didn't like it.
We say the church, that's a bit... It's not the 14th century,
Swathes
there's quite a few.
of various denominations of the church didn't like it.
At one point, Pullman said, well, I'm not targeting Christianity or whoever it was particularly. He's like, I'm criticising all religions, and I hope that other people are equally annoyed about this. And at the time, you're like, oh, okay, yeah, that's, ecumenical or something. And I feel like maybe that's what Pratchett's doing, but I don't think we can ignore the fact that Pratchett and Pullman are both from a culturally Christian country. I don't know what their specific beliefs are, but they're both British from a country that is culturally very Christian. Yeah. So I think what's being talked about here is largely Christianity. It's certainly Abrahamic religions, but where we are, Christianity is the main one that's been entrenched for over 1,000 years. Yes. So that's going to be kind of what's being discussed. Even if the thought is, this is about organised religion in general, the specifics are kind of that. Having said that, I think there's a lot of interesting points there. There's stuff about echo chambers, which I don't mean in the kind of modern social media sense. Well, I suppose the whole thing is you've got who would manifest as a bull or an eagle or something. Or a swan.
He didn't do eagles, but he definitely did swans. Swans and bulls.
Yes. Which, kind of Zeus-ish.
Yeah, very, very Zeus-ish.
But, again...
And all the smiting he wants to do. Although that's quite Old Testament God.
It just reminds me of an article I read where somebody pointed out that there's a difference between Christian atheism compared to perhaps Jewish atheism, or compared to atheism in other parts of the world and from different cultures, and because no one's bothering to not believe in Zeus.
Yeah.
Not that I'm saying no one, probably some people may believe in that sort of thing, but the point is, if you're from a culturally Christian background you're criticising religion in general, it's probably going to largely be Christianity, which you don't necessarily see when you're in it. But yes, he's this very kind of smitey, turn into an animal, appear every so often. God, who has various prophets, which again is very Abrahamic.
Travelling through the desert.
The idea is that tried to manifest and then turned into a tortoise for 3 years because no one actually believed in him, despite him being the god of an entire nation. Yeah. And I think the echo chamber thing is the idea that people are now worshipping the church and not the god.
Yes.
And that it's all become dogma and structure. And it sort of takes this idea of the church becomes like a shell. I think this is the reason it's a tortoise, as well as obviously it being a very Chelonian sort of world. The church structure becomes a shell for the god, and then the god eventually dies inside it, but that isn't noticed because the structure exists.
Yes. I think it's interesting to also to look at, because obviously Discworld is a world where gods are explicitly exist. And throughout the Phoebe section, philosophers are randomly talking, atheists are talking about how terrible gods are, except for the ones that try and smite them. And the idea that that they're listening and they don't like it if you talk trash about them, or stand on the temple of the small gods in full armour, shout in a rainstorm, shouting all gods are B words. And so the gods existing rely on the belief from their followers and their worshippers to exist within the world, which is an interesting idea of belief and how that powers.
Which he touched on a bit before.
Yeah, the swear words slightly. Belief in things we get into a bit more in Hogfather, but belief in gods.
This feels a bit like him, as well as talking about religion more broadly in Here and Round World. It also feels a bit like him nailing down a little bit more how it works in Discworld,
because he obviously
has been referred to.
He's obviously had, the gods have been in there from the first book, so
but not terribly involved.
No, but this is kind of him sort of going, okay, this is how we're going to do.
Yeah,
and handling gods, as I say, sort of discussing as well gods existing in a world. And belief is a difficult, because belief sometimes is about intangible things in some respects. Well, I suppose it's the difference between faith and belief.
Yes.
You can believe in something, but you can have faith in something.
Well, I think that's the point. Although Brother keeps being referred to as Om's only believer, and that's why Om protects him purely out of self-interest, and also advises him to do various things, again, out of his own self-interest, although they would benefit Brother. But I think the point is that other people believe in the church, but not in Om himself. Like, everything's... Yeah. I think the idea is it's like kind of... It's empty ritual.
Yeah.
It's... And again, the echo chamber thing, I think the stuff with Vorbis, it mentions how his mind is like, it's like a steel ball. Like, the only thing inside there is himself, so what he's worshipping is just himself echoing back. And I think that's like a smaller version of what the structure of the church is.
Yeah.
Because it's incredibly hierarchical, it's incredibly ritualised. An interesting thing with the small gods is I think that reflects kind of animism.
Yeah.
So the idea, you've got like gods of these stones or gods of this spring or that tree, or it's this idea that everything has a spirit or some sort of like life force or something, which obviously is something that a belief that exists all across the world. And I think the idea of this is because the book goes into like the early days of Om and how he became the great god Om.
Yes.
And it's that, some of these small gods get lucky and somebody believes in them and something happens, and then that they build on it. So it's sort of like the idea that if you're ruthless and cutthroat enough, you can grow.
It's kind of food chain in some respects, for gods.
Yeah, I suppose it's not quite like, it's not like he's eating other gods.
No, but he kind of, survival of the ones who are willing to backstab the other gods.
Which is not quite what survival of the fittest is, despite what, like, social Darwinism says.
Yeah.
But, well, so it starts with the parable of the Good Shepherd, like somebody goes and finds the sheep. But it's reinvented Om's origin, and it's interesting because it makes a point like, the shepherd did this, and Om spoke to him and helped him find his sheep, and so the shepherd started worshipping him as a thanks.
Editing Kathy here. We had a slight dropout with the audio around this quote, so this is a re-record. The merest accident of microgeography had meant that the first man to hear the voice of Om, and who gave Om his view of humans, was a shepherd and not a goatherd. They have quite different ways of looking at the world, and the whole history might have been different, for sheep are stupid and have to be driven, goats are intelligent and need to be led. This is the kind of mythic origin thing I quite like, the idea that it could have been all different, had a slightly different person than the first prophet.
Yes,
Had been the first prophet.
Yes, a big goat herder instead of a sheep farmer.
Yeah, shepherd.
Technicalities.
Or the sheep farmer's guy that owns the land. Yeah. But yes, so that's kind of the early bit, and that's, as I say, it's got this mythicness to it. Although, again, my memory of the small gods was a bit different to what it actually was, but I wonder if that's based on other stuff with similar ideas I've read since.
Yeah, I mean, they're really just there as kind of...
They're kind of like a sort of chittering, chattering mass.
Yeah.
But the idea is that Om's got purpose and nous to him, although, again, only because Brother's there. And these others don't have any believers, but they're constantly swarming around. They sort of feel insecty almost, like they're sort of in a swarm and they're sort of going for where there's food.
Yeah, there's this one person with belief, and it's kind of they're trying to steal it. And
yeah. But going into the organised religion stuff, because again, there's this idea that there's like prophets every... I don't know how regular it is, but they seem to know another one's coming. But every, however often when Om talks to somebody,
the prophets are again. I think the prophets are definitely Pratchett's discussion look at organised religion and how it is then twisted by
scriptural transmission.
Yeah, there you go.
Which again, very Christian because of the Abrahamic religion. Well, Christianity is like the odd middle child of the Abrahamic religions. But the fact is, Judaism and Islam are much more similar to each other. Very strong traditions of very accurate scriptural transmission of their holy writings. And Christianity has had that at various points, but at this point it's just gone all a bit
it's become rather fast and loose with it at this point.
So when we get into the church as the structure... And like I said, about sort of a shell for the god. So you've got stuff like the Quisition, which is clearly Inquisition. And you've got the rebels who say the turtle moves, clearly reference to Galileo, and still it moves. And that's quite interesting that he's taking the idea, because the whole thing with the Omnians is they believe that the world is round and goes around the sun. He's kind of having fun with it, but it's also a very serious thing. It's a bit like people have been tortured for all this sort of stuff, because that's the other thing, they're very torture-y.
Yes.
Which, although Om's always smiting people, he seems quite alarmed by the amount of torture that's being done in his name.
I think it's different if you're doing the smiting. If you're smiting someone, it's fine, but people being tortured in your name?
Just mass, of it, yeah. But yeah, the whole thing with obviously Galileo still moves, and the idea that Galileo was persecuted for heliocentrism, and then Pratchett's kind of turning it on its head a bit, and then obviously the fact that the sort of heretics, I don't think that word's used, but that's what that would be, who've travelled and seen outside Omnia, and like sailors who've seen the rim. But it's very early Christianity, because you've got a thing where they draw a picture of a turtle, which is very like what I was taught, admittedly, in primary school, RE, going to a C of E school, that like early Christians would draw a symbol of a fish, and that had some relevance to Christianity that I don't now fully recall. But I think if you write some sort of phrase to do with Jesus in Greek, because obviously that would be the language at the time, because it would, I guess, be the Eastern Roman Empire, it spelled out the word for fish. I don't remember precisely, but there's that thing with the fish.
It's a fish.
And the point is, it just looks like a sketch for a fish.
Yeah.
And this also looks like a sketch for a turtle. But if you're in the know, you know.
Yeah.
Well, you've got different stages. You've got this mythic beginning, you've got like early rebels, but that kind of reflecting early Christianity, and then you've got the church and the torture. Well, obviously the heretics having secret meetings, which again is supposed to be this idea against Rome. Although the Roman Empire was unpleasant to Christians, but they were unpleasant to lots of other people, including Jews.
I think they were equally unpleasant to everyone, I think, at the end.
Well, not equally, no. Different times. The point is, it was a polytheistic thing. If you were worshipping the Christian god, they'd be like, okay, fine, that's just another god. I mean, I think Christians see this a little bit weird to start off with, and there were like lots of rumours around. So they were perhaps slightly outcasty, but it wasn't like a mass scale persecution, just these people. It kind of goes into stuff that's more current. So there's a bit that I think was referencing also prosperity doctrine, which is
I'm just going to nod and agree at this point.
Prosperity doctrine is a very modern thing. I mean, it's probably been around a long time, but it's very big in like North American evangelical circles, and is frankly probably a major cause of a lot of the world's current problems. It's the idea that if you are wealthy, it's because you're doing well, and if you're doing well, it's because God wants you to. So actually, the more wealth you get, the more it shows God loves you, and that what you do is therefore morally correct, because God is rewarding you. And people who aren't wealthy are clearly being punished by God. So yeah, it's dreadful.
Yeah, it's dreadful.
But it's also incredibly huge in a lot of powerful places. Yeah, you can see what you hear about that. I mean, Pratchett doesn't specifically mention that, but he says some stuff that sounds a little bit like, oh, you're supposed to take a vow of poverty. No one's really checking that, It's like, there's a lot of wealth in the church, so, which again is a thing that's gone back a long time. It's one of the things Luther was a bit annoyed about as well, so, it just kind of made me think of that. And then you've got the Holy War stuff. It's like, we're going to justify our holy war. They were persecuting us, so we will persecute them. And how that's all very manipulated.
Yes, I mean, we need a good excuse, so we're going to go send someone over there to do something really, really stupid, get themselves in trouble, and then we're going to invade because it's...
Yeah, well, it's interesting because, they sent a guy over as a missionary, and did they write a load of letters? That's the other thing, because they sort of make reference to writing a lot of letters, which is obviously a reference to the epistles, but I can't remember the exact joke now because it's been a little bit since I read it, but it's also the fact they make a reference to being a chain letter.
Yes.
And I was like, which obviously was a whole thing back in 92. Did you ever get... I mean, it was a bit later when I got one.
I never got one.
I think I got one, once, within some years later than that, and my parents well, you can do this, one time. And then email came along. And now everything is spam. The other thing that's interesting is they send a guy over to preach to the irreligious heretics or barbarians in the neighbouring nation. And it's this whole thing where, again, with a lot of evangelical religions, because that's a incredibly ineffective way of doing any kind of conversion.
Yes.
And actually what it is for is to strengthen the in-group. Because you go out and you tell people, here is the word of God and it will save you. And people are all a bit dismissive or outright hostile. And it just reinforces that, the only people you can trust is us, your religious community. So that's, a thing. But also in the book, Pratchett isn't saying, it doesn't say that having a religious community is really a bad thing.
No.
It's just that this religious community has become, I guess, corrupted. And again, it's the whole idea of it becoming an echo chamber of shell. It's just bouncing the same stuff back at each other, and there's not necessarily any real faith. Although, again, that tortoise is very grumpy and vengeful, so he doesn't really seem like he deserves it. It does feel like Brother's faith is a thing that marks him out. So the other thing I had was militant decency and kindness, which is, again, talking very specifically about Brother. But do you have anything else on the, religious thing?
No, I think, I mean, there's no point does he say, religion is bad, don't do religion. I think it's perhaps getting you to think more about the religions you're following, or why you're following,
or how it's organised.
Yeah, perhaps have a look and say, are the people I'm following and listening to, and the things I'm being asked to do as under religion actually, I wouldn't say worth it, but right. So
I think that comes relation to Brother's thing, because he has all these rules and he's memorised all this stuff, which was a bit like, I don't know what you're talking about, what is this? It's like, no, yes. I didn't say that.
Yeah, with good examples of prophets just going, okay, do you know what I don't like? I don't like this, so we're just going to make it a word of
No
God.
necessarily prophets, just people writing it down later, like scribes.
Well, no, they were carved onto the doors. The prophets come back from the thing with their book of whatever.
Yeah.
And it's carved onto the doors of...
Well, that's what they're told. How long those doors been there, Dave? Somebody commissioned the doors at some point, is what I am saying. It wasn't that shepherd at the start. It was after they'd built the city. The thing with Brother is that he seems to be in a religion that has some lip service to kindness, but that doesn't seem to be a big part of it, and his God certainly isn't into that at all.
No.
But Brother himself is incredibly kind, and this made me think of the militant decency post that has been circulating on the internet for quite some time. It seems to be posted by Social Ephemera. I can't tell when, but I've definitely been seeing it for years and years and years. And it's more of a wide thing about Pratchett, but I think it really comes through in this book. So, Social Ephemera says, thematically speaking, the most important thing Terry Pratchett taught me was the concept of militant decency. The idea that you can look at the world and its flaws and its injustices and its cruelties and get deeply, intensely angry, and you can turn that into energy for doing the right thing and making the world a better place. He taught me the anger itself is not the path I should be fighting. Nobody in my life ever said that before. Now, this comes up a lot in Pratchett. I think we've already mentioned in the Witches books with Granny Weatherwax about damming up anger, and that was clearly what Pratchett was doing. That's clearly himself.
Yes.
He's so angry about some stuff, but he's laying it out there, but in a way that's engaging and accessible and funny. The thing with Brother is it doesn't start with anger, though. It starts with decency and kindness. Brother is just trying to help. The fact that most people are suggesting he should eat the tortoise, and even without
eating on the...
Is there, though? I will say, just a side note, I think this book slightly misrepresents tortoises. It's always about how frail they are, and also they're good to eat. And slow and not good at getting around. We've been to Greece. We've seen tortoises walking around. They can move when they want to.
They're like tanks.
And also, Natalie Haynes once said in, I can't remember if it was in a podcast or one of her shows I went to, but anyway, she said she'd seen some tortoises fighting when she was visiting some ruins in Greece and found them quite terrifying. So I think they're just a bit hardier than people think. Anyway, Brother's just been trying to do what's right, and he's been told to do things. He kind of does what he's told, but he's been influenced. He's met Ephesians, he's seen their library, but he can't read or write. He's illiterate. And he's kind of seen the heretics, and I think he's just getting all these ideas and he's not quite sure what to do. But when he is stuck in the desert, and it's just him and and Vorbis. And at this point, he understands what Vorbis has done. Vorbis has, as you say, basically engineered a holy war.
Yeah.
And in fact, what we learn is that Vorbis had started engineering the retaliation before he'd even sent out the guy for the justification.
He was planning well in advance.
Vorbis is absolutely terrifying. And, actually, Tansy Rayner Roberts has quite a good post published recently in Speculative Insight. And it's one of the ones that's free to read about Pratchett's villains. I think it's 7 of the worst villains. And Vorbis is definitely in there. Also, I think when we read Pyramids, I was expecting Dios to be worse, and I think what I was actually remembering was Vorbis.
Yes.
Because they're both very deserty.
They're very, very similar. It's like
a terrible guy in charge of things in a deserty place.
Yeah.
I mean, Dios has mentioned that post as well, but he wasn't as bad as I thought he'd be when I read it, and then I read this, I was like, I was thinking Vorbis. So Vorbis is this horrifying person who everything he does is justified. Everything he does, he knows in his mind this is the God. And the idea is his mind's like a steel ball, and all he ever hears is just his own thoughts echoing back at him against that echo chamber thing on a small scale. Because the only way to get to Athebe is by boat, because there's a desert in between. But what he did was he sent tons of people to create a route through the desert, and then people died to create that route on his orders. But what happens is that he then has to go back through this. And the only reason he survives is because Brother will not leave him behind. So is there, and he is terrified. If Brother dies, he is just a tortoise forever. He's lost. That's his only believer. So he's constantly telling Brothers, leave him behind. He's awful. You don't like him. Because this is the thing. At one point, it seems like the Ephesians have them catch and have the upper hand. He sees Brother as a tool and uses him, and then they end up taking over, and then they get fought off. But at that point, it's been made right, because Brother's got enough information. Because everyone underestimates Brother, so they just kind of tell him things. Even Vorbis knows he remembers everything and tells him to forget, and so that's not possible for him. But Vorbis is a bit like, there's the actual truth, and then there's the spiritual truth. And it's like, what actually happened was, they said, the Ephesians killed our man and were terrible to him. What they did was they laughed at him and humiliated him a bit and said, no, you're being a pest, go away. And that was all ginned up to create a retaliation. But the time it took to get those tracks through the desert, he started planning it before.
Yeah.
So it's very engineered and therefore quite terrifying. Vorbis appears to be brain damaged because they're in a shipwreck and they get washed up on the shore and they're in the desert, and Brother just keeps walking. He says we have to go back to Omnia. Om's there. Om's protecting him from the small gods, but he's like, leave him. But Vorbis just seems to be catatonic. And Brother is there, trying to share what little food they have with him, trying to give him sips of water, trying to shade him, kind of basically, I think, carrying him.
Yeah.
And at one point there are lions.
No, just one lion.
One lion. Okay. And Om says, leave him to the lion. If the lion will eat him, you can get away. Because all Om cares about is Brother, because he only exists because Brother is there. And even though Brother is being ordered by his gods, who he obviously believes in because he can hear him, to basically sacrifice somebody else for his own preservation, Brother will not do it. And that is the purest version of him. And it's that idea, you go out into the desert and you kind of find out like the Revelation Desert thing. Again, very Abrahamic religion. But yeah, he goes and he drags him. And only once it's clear they can make it do we see that Vorbis, horrifyingly, was faking it the whole time, using Brother to survive. And then as soon as he gets the opportunity, he
knocks him out.
Knocks him out, tries to kill the tortoise, and then just goes. And this is the thing, once Brother's back in the Citadel of Om, around the whole structures and everything, Vorbis has gone through the desert, he's going to be the new prophet. He heard that that's how he survived the desert. And when Brother turns up, he's like, he was part of my thing. And Brother knows he's lying, but he's in this structure again. It's like the structure and all the things the heretics said and all the things the Thebans said and what he's being told very definitely by the, hierarchy he's lived in most of his life. It's also confusing. And at that point, it's like in the desert, he demonstrates this very pure idea of sort of sacrificing yourself. Not even sacrificing yourself, but care for others. That's the decency and the kindness. He's not going to leave him behind. And I was like, Vorbis would leave you behind in a second, and then actually knocks him out and does that. And Brother's like, but that's him, that's not me. So it's this idea of, he's not got to the militant bit there, but the decency and the kindness, and that when he is away from the structure, he just is himself, and it's taking care of others and taking care of the vulnerable, which is kind of what you want from a religion.
Yeah.
Care for a community, even if that community is only like one other person who's frankly kind of unpleasant. Or, in fact, horrifying. So that's just a thing that I thought was important to mention. And I also think at the end, with what happens, it sort of shows that Brother perhaps deserves where he gets to, and he's got to that not through divine help. Om's helped him sort of with the small gods, but physically he can't really help him, he's a tortoise. He's probably more of a drain on resources, but the point is it's that which feels more holy than any of the structures.
Yeah.
Do you have anything else?
I'm just letting you go on this one. I think this is the thing. I don't have as much kind of thoughts on that kind of side of things.
That's fine.
Which is possibly why the book, it didn't quite...
Okay. Building on that, I feel like the book also shows Brother various ways to be.
Yes.
Which are all masculine. But we've touched on that. So you've got just wanting to smite people, but still kind of disgusted and terrified by torture. I don't know if it's particularly... It's just that it seems like torture's quite inventive. And that makes it cruel. There's a thing, and I think... Which book is it in? Is it in... I think it's Regeneration by Pat Barker, which is based around the Second World War, and it has a lot of stuff about people who have shell shock. But there's a bit in that where they say... It's kind of the idea of imagination and how it can be horrible. Because the thing with crucifixion, just to take a very famous example, is that you actually asphyxiate first. Yeah. And it's a very horrible way to die. So rather than just like, oh, this guy's a problem, we're going to stab him or execute him, it's particularly horrible. And again, a lot of stuff with the Spanish Inquisition is you've got people whose job is to come up with tortures. And I feel like Om definitely sees some stuff when he looks through event down to where the Inquisition is based and is like, oh no. Because he as a god is just like, I'm going to blast somebody with a thunderbolt and there we go. Or I'm going to smite you and curse you to something for generation. But it's like, we're just going to do it a simple way and then it's done. Not this kind of horribleness. So it's this kind of horrifying imagination. Vorbis, obviously, example, because the thing with Vorbis is he's only a deacon or something. He's not that high up in the church.
No, but he's head of
he's head of the Inquisition, and he's head of that bit, which is where all the information comes in and where the tortures are devised, and one feels like he's very involved in that, and definitely the turtle thing later. And then you've got life in Sistar in general, so you've got stuff like, there are obviously a lot of regular people around. You've got the slightly odd guy who oversees the novices.
Yes.
And one of the funnier bits is de Blas, or cut off my own hand, de Blas. That's it, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yes. Who sells lots of stuff in that kind of courtyardy pilgrimage place, including stuff like after their sell-by dates. He's also the guy who later kind of comes up with the idea of the turtle as a symbol, but it's kind of taking what was the heretical symbol. When Brother finally stands up to Vorbis decides to make an example of him because he's only going to show him any kindness while he's useful. And as soon as he stops being useful, it becomes a problem. Because the heretics believe in the turtle, they do this horrible thing where they make an iron turtle, strap him to it, and then they're going to set it on fire, so he's basically burned. It's again burning people. I mean, burning is a very inefficient way to do almost anything.
Yes, but it's very painful and torturous.
Yes, torture. Oh, because that's the thing, because de Blas, because it's supposed to be this big thing where he becomes the prophet and takes on whatever mantle it is that involves, and torturing and executing Brother is kind of part of that. And so So then the turtle becomes the symbol. And de Blau's like, I'm just going to take the little man off of it, though. So obviously the whole thing in Christianity is like, oh, the cross. Okay. But then obviously you go to church, it's got like a man on it, and you're like, that's actually quite grisly when you think about it for any length of time. But yeah, you've got, it's obviously one of the Dibbler types, but they've got a crowd, so he's there. So when he goes to Thebe, he meets various philosophers, and you've got Zeno and Ibid, who are in pyramids, so we know that that's got to be sometime within like a few decades of that, which we might get to timelines later.
We'll get to that in a moment.
But then you've got Didactylus and his nephew Ern. So Didactylus is clearly Diogenes, because he lives in a barrel. He's also blind, but finds a way around. So Ern kind of helps out. His nephew Ern, it's spelled U-R-N, like Grecian urn, so that was funny. And I mean, you know how I like to see a Grecian pot in things. But Ern's more of like an engineer. And again, we get steam.
Yes.
And when is this? So you've got Didactylus. Because the thing is, the heretics all have the turtle moves as this tract that they pass around secret and having these secret meetings. They're drawing their turtles on the wall and they're trying to undermine the church a bit in this simple way. And it's all based on Didactylus. Didactylus didn't even massively believe that. He just kind of wrote a thing. And people were like, this is going to be the basis of our new faith. And he's like, I'm what now? He didn't mean for that to happen.
He just,
And they end up being taken by the rebels and they have him like, oh, you now have to teach us. And he's like, it's just a thing I wrote down. What?
You need to make some money.
Yeah. Got to keep the barrel furnished. Although Didactylus has quite a good thing. Well, it's kind of like the whole still it moves thing, if it had been badass. Didactylus means two fingers, and so Didactylus is basically putting two fingers up. Brother sees the philosophers who kind of seem to be sort of philosophizing, also sort of entertainment. He meets Didactylus and Ern, talks to them. Ern's very engineering, building stuff, and he creates a boat and like a steam... Is that also called the steam turtle?
It's steam turtle.
Everything's a turtle of some kind.
It's based off the Roman shield formation.
Oh, yeah.
It's basically the Roman shield formation crossed with a tank. So a powered Roman shield formation.
He also had like a little steamship, didn't he, as well?
Yeah, but kind of, again, like a... pretending to be some kind of motorboat, basically.
I mean, there's also the bit where they show how Thebe had previously defeated their enemies because they have the big thing of mirrors, which is basically the Aristotelian death ray.
Yeah.
Which is the idea that if you got enough mirrors and you focused them the right way, they would send a death ray that would attack any ships that approach. But they did it on Mythbusters. That's not actually true. Aristotle apparently did come up with something like that.
Good in theory, terrible in practice.
Yes.
I mean, it's effectively making a laser out of sunlight, but it is really difficult to do.
Again, it's one of these ideas that's attributed to Aristotle. It's kind of interesting because it's a mixture of philosophy as the kind of abstract thought stuff, but then you've also got what used to be called natural philosophy, also now known as science, and also kind of engineering in there. So it's this idea that philosophers are useful, but sometimes they're coming up with something that's a bit like, I'm sorry, what's this? And sometimes they come up with something that actually seems like it might be handy. Just being in a Thebe, brother speaks to a slave. And they're like, oh, we don't have slaves in Omnia. And the slave's like, well, that doesn't sound very good. Because basically the slaves are unionised?
Yes. Like, basically they've got terms and conditions that almost... It's like they get to, 1 week's free runaway. They get to run away for free 1 week in a year and kind of it's a holiday.
I mean, you've got to remember that the part of the ancient world that Pratchett is based on didn't have what we now call chattel slavery, and it wasn't based on particular populations. So people would be slaves, but usually because like their city had been conquered. There's a whole thing in ancient Rome, for example, where every so often it's going to be a bit like, should we do something to mark out who's a slave and who's free so that it's visible to people? And other people are like, no, because they don't know how many of them there are, which shows that it wasn't based on any kind of racial or ethnic or specific like physical appearance or group. It's just that like some people were slaves, and obviously slavery is bad, definitely, but it's just interesting that Pratchett's getting this thing and making it sound very unionized. I work between these times, and as you say, one runaway a year, but that's like the holiday, and but then you come back. It's like, oh, we can free you. And he's like, no, that sounds difficult. It's like, well, who would feed me then?
Yeah.
It's like, you have to feed yourself.
That sounds worse.
It's like, well, no, because I'm being fed right now.
3 square meals here.
Yeah, and it's just kind of this, again, so you can be free. It's like, but if freedom is more difficult than slavery or indentured servitude or some things. And then you've got Simony and the rebels. So Simony is somebody who's, I guess, guards military bits of the church.
They were sort of, royal guard, not royal guard, sort of holy guard.
Yes. But
I'm thinking Vatican guards, kind of.
Oh, the guys with the fun outfits.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't think their outfits was fun.
No.
He's part of the rebels, so he's actually the one who's kind of leading the rebellion. Because they're kind of aware Vorbis is awful, but they also are against the church, and they get Ern to build them this stuff so they can cross the desert and break in. But he seems very grumpy.
Yeah.
And then one way to be that I think is open specifically to Brother that's shown is St. Ungulant. Ungulant? Yes. While he's out in the desert, Brother meets a guy called St. Ungulant, although it turns out that that's probably just that his initials are ST, not that he's been sainted. But he lives in the desert among the small gods, and it's wonderful. He has the best food, the best drink. There's beer's always on tap, there's always a load of meat.
Women.
Well, again, I don't think the word women is actually said, there's just references. And who's going to talk to?
Angus.
Angus, yes, and he's like, oh, that's right, Angus, isn't it? And he's turning and talking to somebody, and Brother's like, there's no one there. But then Brother spent the whole book talking to a tortoise, and Brother realised, here's somebody else, the small gods, because they try and tempt him in the desert. Again, the whole thing. But stops them. And what happens is, Brother's like, but do you not find every so often you have to drink out of a puddle and eat a lizard? And he's like, yeah, every so often I do kind of just want to drink some puddle water and just eat a lizard, even though they're a bit chewy. But it's right, the rest of the time it's all beef. And basically, this is a guy who lives entirely in this kind of world the small gods have made, because they need a believer. In order to get a believer, you have to do stuff for them, but they don't have any physical existence. No. So it's all mental. So it's kind of this idea that if he wanted to, Brother could just maybe stay in the desert and live a life that's entirely fantastical, but every so often he would have to actually take care of a physical need, which would mean eating half a lizard and drinking out of a puddle. And it's interesting because St. Ungulant is living on a big platform on a big pole.
Yeah.
That's an actual thing. So there were these people called the Stylites, which was a reference to, I think, Simeon Stylites, who was this weird hermit guy who basically lived on a platform on a pole, and was very holy for some reason. Because
you live on a pole, you've got to be holy. There's got to be some reason for doing it.
I think he was the main one that did it, and then other people kind of did it later. But I think there's sort of this idea of leaving the world behind and being a bit hermity and that kind of thing. It's just interesting because it's a bit here's a way Brother could live this way. The small gods were already kind of offered that to him. The quote that made me think quite strongly this bit is it didn't matter if you fooled yourself, provided you didn't let yourself know it and did it well.
Yeah.
Because this is the point, Brother's well, how are you eating? Oh, every so often I just eat because he thinks he's eating beef all the time. Every so often he gets so hungry. And he's talking to Angus. And then Angus says something back, and it's all right. It's just various ways. Brother is, all of his life, it's been terrible grandmother, then he's a novice, and do some gardening, and himself and then it's his horizons are expanded, but expanded so much, so quickly, that I think for a while he isn't quite sure what to do. And again, going back to Vorbis, as this terrible person. The worst thing about Vorbis isn't that he's evil, but that he makes good people do evil. He turns people into things like himself. You can't help it. You catch it off him.
Yeah.
And again, this idea that if Brother wanted to, because initially he returns, it's oh, Brother, who helped me in the desert, you can be at the right hand of the prophet. He could just live in the church and get quite high up and then be a bishop or whatever it was.
I can't remember.
That gives him a bit of leeway, but he has this horrible moral quandary, and he could do that. And again, it goes back to fooling yourself. But then you would be like Vorbis, and you'd be propping up Vorbis, because he knows Vorbis didn't speak to Om.
Yeah.
Brother knows he's the only one that spoke to Om, because no one else can hear Om. It's very interesting to sort of see different ways for him to be. Did you want to talk about the history monk? I felt the main bit is about Brother's moral quandary.
Yes. So Thief of Time is one of my top 5 books, and I'd completely forgotten that we get the history monks introduced at this point.
They go away again for a while.
They go away for it. And we get introduced to Lucy. Lucy. We'll work out a pronunciation for that by the time we get to Thief of Time, who is one of the history monks.
The sweeper.
The sweeper has bonsai mountains. You can only do bonsai mountains if you're a monk of history, because they take a lot of time to develop. Lucy is 700 years old, and he is sent out from the monastery where all the different ways of storing history in this one. It's not the big spinny thing.
There's not so much about it, is there?
To
It mentions the abbot, though.
Yeah, to go and witness it. The idea that events happen, but history is witnessed. So you have to have somebody there to witness history. Mm-hmm. And throughout the book, he's kind of there sweeping.
Helping in the garden.
Yeah, not really, doesn't talk, but just kind of points out and, kind of there being a witness, and later on does one very minor thing. So it doesn't upset the space-time continuum. So while they are making the Iron Turtle, there is a lever that needs to be forged to basically make it go. And Lucy sneaks in and quenches it before it's fully, so that the metal is brittle, so that when they go to throw the lever to make it move, it breaks and it doesn't burst down the walls, the doors of the citadel when it should, and it helps. It's a small minor change that he does, which results in Brother becoming the prophet and the head of the Omnian Church.
I thought he also helped because when Brother has this big moral quandary, he ends up... In my head, he's like lying down in the garden. I'm not sure what he's actually doing, but I feel like he's there, and then Luzi, who'd never spoken before, suddenly says some stuff to him.
Yes.
And he doesn't give him any advice, but somehow I think he just gives him enough space.
Yes, it's the kind of
that's
wise...
the bit I remember better.
It's the wise monk who doesn't...
It's interesting, because on the cover of the book, there is a guy holding a broom, and he doesn't look at all how expected, but if you said monk, you'd be like, with a broom, you'd be like, yeah, but obviously that's very, Western, beardy, robe sort of monk. Brown robe monk, and obviously in later things, Lucy is very
Yeah, I never looked. I never considered.
He's the only guy with the broom on the cover.
Yes, but
obviously later, as we know him, he's more shaven-headed, yellow robes.
Yes,
Eastern style monk. But yeah, and it's interesting because at one point it sort of mentions him returning to the history monks, and he says he goes for a tunnel, and I'm like, is this like that Tibetan tunnel thing? Which I only know about from Good Omens, to be honest. It's not a thing I've encountered elsewhere.
Gives him a cup of tea.
Oh, that was it. I know he did something. I think the point is that, yes, he does the thing with the handle, but he also gives Brother a comforting space to actually think through his moral quandary.
Basically, just to talk to someone.
Yeah. He wasn't trying to tell him what to do or what to think. Because that's the thing, the rebels are you have to act against Vorbis. Vorbis is saying, well, if you have a comfortable life, if you stick with me, and also will do horrible things if he doesn't, which is what happens. And also, the thing with the rebels is Simon is really angry and he wants to take down the church, and he's really disappointed that Dactylus is just a bit no, I'm not genuinely up to be a revolutionary.
So the history monks are thrown in there. I enjoy the history monks, but that doesn't help us pin down timelines, because obviously it's something we have talked about previously. Is where these books fit into. Well,
so what we said with the first 10 was that Pyramids was the most standalone, and I mentioned the theory, which I kind of agreed with, that Pyramids could be hundreds of years before anything else, because although it has Ankh-Morpork in it, it just has the Assassin's Guild, which is one very long-running guild. Or it could be a long time before what a lot of the rest of the books are. Yeah. Now, the fact that you have Ibid and Zeno in this shows, okay, it's got to be the same sort of rough time period, though it could be some decades apart from Pyramids. Yeah. Also, this is the only book that mentions Djel, because at one point a load of neighbouring countries go to invade Omnia because they've been massive pain, and it does mention that people from Djeli Baby are there.
Yes, there's a general from Djeli Baby. Yeah.
Yes. Okay, we're going to talk about the end because we have to do it for this. Brother's being tortured and Om is trying to get back to him. And, there's this one bit. So they strap Brother to the... What's that turtle called? Maybe a different metal? The other metal turtle, the torturing one. But basically, he straps his metal turtle, and they set him on fire. And he says, I'm on my back and I'm getting hotter and I'm going to die. And I was like, ooh, when I read that, because very early on in the book, Vorbis finds Om the tortoise in the garden, flips him over, puts a stone on his stomach so he can't roll back, and Om thinks to himself, I'm on my back, I'm getting hotter, and I'm going to die. So it's this very chilling, very strong symmetry, because when I read that line, I was like, now I have to go back and see if that line is the same as before, because I remember it. And it just shows how Vorbis is. And it's it's not even that Vorbis wanted to torture the animal, he's just interested to see what happened, which, again, creepy. But yeah, Omna gets back, and then with Brother, he's able to manifest. And then it's really interesting, because what happens is, it tells a story then from the far future, or from the future, because it basically has... there's no book of Brother But this is what various scribes wrote down. And then it writes down de Blas saying things, and it's written kind of with all the numbers in, a bit like you have in the Bible, like chapter and verse.
Because those are the lines that Om's saying.
Yeah. So every time Om speaks, it's like it's got the sort of chapter and verse numbers in. But it's like just before the climax, it references the renovation, which I found very fun. But I am listening to a lot of history podcasts at the moment, some of which are like heading towards the Reformation. The renovation. It basically is right before the kind of climax of the story, and it sort of explains what de Blas later told the scribe. So you can sort of see de Blas kind of like saying, oh, but I wouldn't have done, like kind of telling what happened from his selling a lot of things layperson angle. And it's just a very smart way of telling the story. It's like, oh, this is a thing later, and obviously, so you kind of know what happens, that Brother gets raised up, but you don't know how. And then Brother's arguing with Om, because Om wants to go, smitey, and Brother's like, no, that's not what we're doing. And then Brother says something about, let's give it 100 years.
Yeah.
And then it jumps to him as an old man. And it's 100 years later, and he's got to be like 116-ish?
Yeah.
Because the idea is that I think Brother is young adult kind of age. So there's obviously been 100 years. The problem is that we see Omnians later, and we know it's after Brother because they've got those turtle things, because de Blas like, right, I'm going to sell a load of these, but like take the little man off. Because he's now the prophet, the actual prophet. And we see Omnians going about, and it's clear that the church exists. And there's the whole thing with the library as well.
Yes.
It's got a massive library because Brother, although he can't read, we haven't talked about him saving the library, have we? But
no, so there is basically the burning of the Library of Alexandria, which all librarians sigh. And so yes, they go and burn the
Omnians when they're invading a Thebe. Yeah,
because obviously they don't want that the knowledge of a. So Brother basically memorizes the board, but not because he can't read. He just memorizes the shapes and the pictures.
He's illiterate, so he can't read or write, but he has perfect recall. So if you show him something, he can write it again. So they just hold scroll after scroll up in front of him like he's some sort of computer drive. Yeah. And I'm pretty sure, and I can't remember what it is, and there's probably a few different things, there are traditions where when people are being threatened, the authorities that are coming to bring us down, are going to destroy our writings, so people would memorise sections to kind of transmit it, but the point is he's memorised the whole library. But so you don't get much of what this future church is. And is it the future, or is it like what we think of as present day? Because all we know is that the Omnian Church has Brother and has the turtle symbol, but it's hard to tell from the few Omnians we see quite how that. It still seems very churchy.
I would sort of lean towards it being the sort of the end of the book is more where we're at.
But it could be later, because obviously after Brother dies, the church continues. So is it that's actually later and things have been changed?
It could be,
It could be quite a lot later, I think. I think we know this links to pyramids, but it doesn't tell us at what point pyramids is, and I think pyramids could still be a century before.
I think 100 years perhaps, but I don't think you're pushing.
I think it could be more.
I don't. Not with the Assassin's Guild, and
the Assassin's Guild is obviously very old.
Okay.
It's like the university in Oxford. How long's that been there, Dave?
I left there. I don't care. So, I think the point it could be. I think this and pyramids. I think is in the past. We think it definitely is in the past. Well, I think 100 years is your earliest. I think
could be a couple.
I think it's the point is that's the kind of,
because you've had whatever Brother does is the renovation.
Yes,
and then
it's got to,
but then Omnians still seem to be in fact they seem more evangelising, but not in a kind of like holy war way, and it's like we're going to go out and talk to people kind of way.
I think that's fine. I think
that could be later after Brother's gone.
But it's got it's got to change. It's got to spread.
So the other thing I want to talk about is the thing after that.
Yes.
Normally, obviously death appears in every Discworld book, somebody dies, and it's like death takes them, but then what happens next is up to them. In this, consistently, people die and they're in a desert, which makes sense, they're from desert culture, but even the sailors, they're from desert, it's like a desert coastal nation, and a lot of people on a ship die in a storm, and after death takes them, they're on a ship in the desert, so like sailing across the desert. But everyone who dies, or certainly all Omnians who die, they're in the desert.
They cross the desert.
And the idea is you cross the desert to get to whatever's next. Yeah. And then Brother, the prophet of Om, the prophet who created the renovation but doesn't have a book of Brother, dies. And Om's there, And he's going to walk through the desert, and then he finds Vorbis, who died a century beforehand. And I think this is this idea of a reward later. Vorbis, who has been the most terrifying and certain person in the whole book, is afraid to walk the desert himself. So Brother says, well, I'll go with you, you follow me. And he guides him through. Goes back to the thing, no matter what Vorbis is like, brother is brother, and he's going to help.
Yeah.
So that felt very powerful. Yeah, there's just a lot to it. It's not struck your eye quite the same way. And again, I think a lot of the stuff that you felt you were missing from it, I kind of got just because I've studied a lot of history stuff around this.
Again, it's not...
I think it's the kind of thing where people didn't necessarily need that because the underlying message, but for me, I think I've read it either when too young or too old. Also, maybe the lack of women have a...
Yeah, perhaps I don't need the underlying message, so the rest of it is kind of like, then I'm kind of feeling like I'm missing stuff. I mean, I think if you're doing a read like we're doing, I think this much like Pyramids is skippable.
But a lot of people say it's a good starting point. I mean, you and I are saying it didn't gel with us so much, but I can see it. Because if what you want from Pratchett, you've heard he is taking on big ideas, he's talking about militant decency, and that's the thing you're interested in, then Small Gods makes sense. Also, then you're not like, I have to remember who these characters are. It's just like, here you go. So. I mean, I've seen it as a couple of different versions of where you can start based on what you're interested in. Small Gods is always there. And some people say this is when they feel like Pratchett really gets into a stride, which I can see.
I'm not going to argue that. I think, certainly for the last few books, it's been building. And
if you consider again, Pyramids being the close one, we said Pyramids is riffing on stuff. It's not railing against anything.
No.
This is absolutely... railing against so much stuff. So there's the stuff like how they do democracy in Thebe. There's just all these little bits as well. Like some of the stuff I've mentioned, there's only small references. Stuff like, and then 5 years later they elected another one just like him. And really, it was amazing how intelligent people kept making the same mistakes. And you're like, ooh.
Yeah.
Or the thing about... this is about gods, but also it's society. It's like people who aren't busy all the time might start to think.
Yeah.
There's an aside point, and that's a whole essay on how things are and why they're bad.
Yeah.
So I can see if that's what you're looking for, if you're looking for something that has that kind of spirit, that kind of railing against all sorts of stuff, this is absolutely in there. The other one is Breath of God was ultimately the sweat of men. Because there's the whole idea with the big doors. That they're supposed to... the breath of God opens these doors. It's a mechanism. And the thing that turns the mechanism is all the people they're torturing in the basement.
Yeah.
Again, it's kind of like a mechanical Turk, but also that it's kind of more horrific than that.
Yeah.
There's just so many bits in it that you can really get into. And I think that's why so many people love it.
Yeah.
And so I think it can be a good starting point. It just gets not gelled quite as much with you and I.
No.
But,
That's there is a lot. There is a lot.
I haven't even got all the references. The mentions of the Platonic cave and shadows. Brother says the Captain Oates line when he jumps off the ship.
Yeah.
It's like, I'm going out maybe sometime. You're about okay. I don't know if they still teach that at school here.
Possibly not.
Yeah, and some stuff with the gods as well. Starts to become, because he's been something small and humble for 3 years, and he sort of sees how the gods are. Because it's the whole thing about how eagles kill tortoises is that they pick them up, they fly, they see a pointy rock, they drop them on it so they smash, and then they can eat them. And that's also how Aeschylus, the real-life ancient Greek playwright, is supposed to have died, that his head looked like a rock. A tortoise was dropped on him from a great height. I don't know how true that is, but it's memorable. But yeah, it's this idea that the eagles are, very cruel, and starts taking against eagles and then starts seeing to the gods, it's like, we're all like eagles up here. The gods are so high up.
Yeah.
They've just forgotten everything, and himself was like that too. Here's another good quote. It's like, logic is only a way of being ignorant by numbers. So I can absolutely see, it makes sense for people. Although we've managed to talk about this for quite a while now.
Yeah, I mean, as I said, there is a lot to it. He's writing about things and...
And again, this is what was missing from Pyramids, I think.
Yes, I think very much so. You actually got something that you feel like is,
It's very meaty.
Yeah. Okay, well, there you go. If you like something that's a bit meaty, there's good eating on them turtles. And I realised I said turtle rather than tortoise. So, we're going to wrap it up there, I think. The next book is Lords and Ladies, which is another one I don't think I've read that many times.
I've read that one a lot.
Okay, that doesn't surprise me. So, thank you all very much for listening,
Yes,
and we shall see you next time.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to Dining Table Discworld. You can find us on Facebook at www.facebook.com/Dining Table Discworld. You can also find us on BlueSky at dtdiscworld. All our other contact information and credits for our music can be found in our show notes. Thank you for listening again, and we'll see you in our next episode.